Okay, I thought all sorts of people would start to flood in now, so. Oh, okay, here we are. Hi, everyone. We are just waiting for everyone to get into the room, and we will start within a minute or two. Hello, welcome everyone. As you're coming into the room, we're just going to get everyone a minute or two to get into the room. We have 10 attendees here right now, and we have a sign-up list of about 50. So I know not everyone arrives right on time, but we're not going to wait too long. All right, we're going to get started. My name is Andrea Porter. I'm the program manager at Seattle Good Business Network. We're a nonprofit with a mission to connect and inspire people to buy, produce, and invest locally so that everyone has a meaningful stake in the local economy. I'm the program manager of both Seattle Made and Seattle Restored. We'll be recording this session today for those of you who were unable to join us, or if you'd just like to revisit the session in the future. Susanna will also be sharing the slide deck, and we will follow up by email by Friday with both the recording and the slide deck. Feel free to add any questions you might have to chat, and I will be answering questions that I have information about there during the presentation, and then I will be reading out questions to Susanna at the end of the presentation as well. So that is it from me for a little intro, and now I'd like to introduce Susanna Tran. Susanna, I will let you take it away.
Thank you, Andrea. Hello, everyone. My name is Susanna Tran. I'm with West Coast Commercial Realty. I am a commercial broker that specializes in retail and industrial, whether that be commercial leasing, the purchase and sale of a business, or purchase and sale of real property. I come from a background with a large family of entrepreneurs. My parents actually started one of the first Vietnamese restaurants in Seattle around 1980, 81, somewhere in there. That's actually an interesting story. My parents, having been refugees from Vietnam, started their first restaurant. And at the time, Seattle didn't really know what Vietnamese food was unless they were in the war. So that short-lived restaurant became a different endeavor for them. They later on in 1989, they opened Saigon Dynasty, which is in South Seattle. Anybody from that region would recognize that name, and had both Vietnamese and Chinese food to make it easier for the non-Vietnamese to experience Vietnamese cuisine as a gateway food. So I later on became an esthetician and opened spas and salons. I had also an eyewear store right in downtown Seattle. So I have a very varied background in relation to business ownership as well as retail, and that's where my experience comes into play as a commercial broker. To begin our discussion, I'd like to kind of outline some of the things that we have to consider as the process for leasing space. And we'll go into detail for each of these subjects. So first of all, it's identifying your space needs. That's a lengthy discussion because everybody's needs are different. But today, because I believe it's predominantly food and beverage industry, is that right, Andrea, or is this for more than just the food and beverage industry?
This is more than just food and beverage, so you can be more expansive.
Okay, great. And then talking about financials, what does that mean? There are certain documents that you'll need to provide at the get-go, even if you're just showing some interest in the location for lease or what have you. And then we have to talk about business branding as well. And so I always indicate you only have one time to make a good first impression. So providing and being prepared with a branding deck is really important. The process that most brokers are associated with is the letter of intent. That's our beginning stages of the showing the landlord interest in the space and working through some of the negotiations, followed by a lease draft. So once the landlord and you have approved, general terms, then the lease negotiations begin. And then I will walk you through what the lease signing requires. There's a lot of things, even though, during lease negotiations, there's a lot to discuss, but once you get to the lease signing stage, there's also a lot that you can all prepare yourself for as well. So, all right, so back to first steps. We have identifying your space needs. Now, these bullets that I've indicated here, budget, size, and define your use, they all play a major role in, what your broker you'll be working with will use as a guideline for what we're going to search for, right? So your budget is something that you'll have to provide us in terms of, have you looked into your financial plan? At this stage of beginning your search, you definitely need to work on your projections. Your projections, give yourself an idea as, okay, how much can I really afford for rent? There are certain guidelines that generally speaking, people tend to provide, and that's usually, anywhere between 10 to 20% of your gross revenue should be going to rent. Obviously, ideally less, 10% is most ideal, but in certain business types, 20% might be the number because it's a high volume business, high traffic location. It's also about the brand and how the brand is perceived as well. So coming to the table with your broker, with your budget in mind, is going to be extremely helpful, but not just for the broker, but for you as well. The next thing is the size. Now, size can vary so much depending on the type of business that you are. But I do want to let everyone know that size is under 1,200 square feet, which are what everybody wants. Smaller is better nowadays. Tends to be the most challenging size of all. So if you can keep that in mind, that will be helpful for, I think, planning for your future business. So, and the reason why 1,200 square feet is under that size is challenging. Most buildings are built with a certain depth, and therefore the size tends to be small. Anything considered small would be around 1,200 square feet or less. So those of you looking for 600 and 800 square feet, those are very hard to come by unless you're in a shared space, a kiosk type of retail. And even then, oftentimes people still need storage, right? So keep that in mind as you're trying to determine what your space needs are. When it comes to time to define your use, that could mean many things. A use, for instance, a salon is easy example to discuss. We've got salons that only do men's haircuts, so barbershops, right? But then there are salons that offer full service hair, which includes highlighting, straightening services, but then you have hair salons that also offer nail services too. So defining your use makes a pretty big difference, because when you go into a shopping center, for instance, if there is already, let's say, a Hair Masters Supercuts in the shopping center, they may not allow another hair use. However, Great Clips, they're okay with a full service hair salon, a higher end salon going into the space, because they don't service that client, right? So having your use defined is going to be very important. And keep in mind, from the food service side, coffee, tea, sandwiches, those categories have their challenges as well. So when we talk about use, oftentimes as a broker, what we do is we actually find out if there's a not compete clause that would prevent any other type of coffee operator or coffee menu being offered in a restaurant, right? So defining your use early on and understanding what those challenges are in your specific category will be extremely helpful, right? So I've worked with coffee operators, for instance, that also offer sandwiches, and they may just be offering espresso, and in the use clause in the shopping center, it just says that no coffee use, drip coffie use, for instance, then that's acceptable. But if you've got a sandwich operator, and it's easy for me to say, oh, but I'm a Vietnamese sandwich and not a Subway sandwich, for instance. It just depends on how that clause is written in that specific lease for that specific shopping center. So Subway, for instance, tends to say if it's submarine style in sandwich, how is that defined, right? The attorneys and the courts are usually who help determine what that really means. So if you're, again, just think about your category, what that could mean, what that category can be interpreted as, and you'll have to be flexible in a lot of cases. So especially anybody out there that's doing a startup, this is going to be very important. Your plan might have to be able to accommodate different scenarios. And with flexibility, will that allow us more options for you to consider for your location. As we go into site selection and location finding, co-tenancy is also something that you need to consider. So for instance, if you are we'll go back into the salon business. For trying to open a salon, there are a couple of different categories that you want to consider in terms of who do you want as good co-tenants for your business. And that would be anybody that helps drive traffic. So it could be a coffee shop, because, we do require our caffeine every day, or a shopping center with a grocery store, because the grocery store brings a consistent level of traffic and consistent eyes onto your business as well. That allows for your business to pick up additional clientele just by the traffic alone. So co-tenancy is important. I actually have a great example also when a letter press, printing press was looking to relocate, and they had to use very creative means in order to determine how they can, relocate and find the ideal space that allowed them for a lower rent. And so in that case, we talked about, contacting all the bookstores, right? Those bookstores are the ones that are going to have that ideal client base for them. So making sure you're really creative and trying to figure out who that ideal co-tenancy is for you. So zoning. If you're in the city of Seattle, that's actually a little bit easier, but certain government agencies, so whether it's the city or the county, depending on where you're at, will have very specific guidelines for the zoning for your business. But also zoning can affect things like parking. So for I love to give City of Bellevue as an example, because if you notice, there aren't a lot of restaurants in the city of Bellevue. And the reason behind that is because for every 1,000 square foot of restaurant space, you have to have 12 parking spaces. So a shopping center or a strip mall that's 10,000 square feet with only 25 parking spaces, once you figure out how many spaces a salon or bakery or any of those businesses require, those 25 parking spaces are gone pretty quickly. So those are the zoning matters that we all need to think about as we're looking at trying to determine location and the site selection. When looking for space, your space may require various things like loading. Bakeries, if you're doing high volume, you may be requiring enough space for deliveries of, maybe you want to get a pallet of flour each time just because of the volume that you do. Will that pallet fit through your door? So keep those things in mind. Height requirements are also very important. This is especially the case for warehouses. For businesses that are looking for warehouse space, your height requirement, your desire for dock high or is grade level enough. Keep those in mind, and those are the things that we need to, you need to provide your broker or the landlord to determine if the space is viable. Power requirements are also important. It used to be that 200 amps of power, generally speaking, for most businesses are fine. Coffee shops used to just require 400 amps of power. Now we're seeing a requirement for 600 amps of power. If you have a lot of small electrical heat emitting devices, those appliances are the ones that really suck up the most power, generally speaking. So keep that in mind as well. Okay, financial statements. So when we're, after we've looked and found a location that's suitable and you're interested in contacting the landlord and finding out if the lease terms make sense, you'll need to provide financials for the landlord to get an understanding of who you are financially, how viable your business is. So this is particularly important for startups because you're having to prove to the landlord that you're an ideal tenant, right? It's also important for businesses that are very competitive. So right now, restaurants are still very well sought after, and so if some space is already turnkey, we are looking at multiple offers for the one space. So how do you present yourself to look better than the other offers? And oftentimes it's your financials. The landlord is looking for just a snapshot of information, right? So this is a financial statement form that we commonly use. to provide to the landlord an understanding of your assets. And how the landlord looks at this is they want to see, ultimately, they want to see your net worth. So your net worth provides them of an understanding that you have enough money to actually open the business. So you've got funds in order to, do construction if required. Your startup costs, equipment costs, supplies, the ability to pay your staff for 6 months along with your rent without actual income, right? Because any startup from the get-go doesn't quite reach profitability in that 6-month period. In fact, some businesses don't see profitability until the first year, or sometimes the first 3 years. So when you're filling this out and providing, keep that in mind. So if you're not able to show that net worth that's enough for your beginning stages of your business, you probably have to find somebody that would be willing to either assist you by also providing their financial statement and or personally guaranteeing the lease. The other thing,
Susanna,
yes.
can you just go into personal guarantees a little bit? I know a few people had questions about that when they signed up.
Yes. So personal guaranteeing is with most leases, you will sign the lease under a corporation name. And with a corporation name, that protects your business, but landlords have caught on to that and have said, well, we'll allow you to sign the lease, but you'll have to, with your corporation, but you will have to sign it personally. So it's an addendum to your lease agreement. It's typically 2 pages long that indicates that if you fail, you're personally liable for the lease. So whatever lease payments that you is in your contract is associates you personally to that lease agreement. So a personal guarantee could be another business partner that is also part of it. Typically, landlords want to see somebody who has at least 33% ownership or more. But even myself, when I first started, and my first lease was my spa downtown, I had to have my parents personally guaranteeing my lease too. So it's not uncommon, it occurs. And if that is a hurdle that you can't get past, the other creative way of getting landlord approval is prepaying your rent. I've had international companies who've opened businesses and they are well established, but they don't have any assets in the United States. So how that's overcome is the landlord would require them to pay 1 year in advance. So in addition to a financial statement, you have to be prepared to provide bank statements, 6 months of bank statements. This is after they've approved you, right? The financial statement form is a quick glimpse to understanding your financial standing, and then the bank statements in your tax returns last 2 years or 3 years. Sometimes if we're going into the mid-year point, sometimes the landlord will request your profit and loss statement and balance sheet, so that they know that your business is currently financially healthy. Those will be required to justify some of the information that you provided in your financial statement. So when we're providing the financial statement, we are also providing your business plan or branding deck as well. So you may have a website. So that's always helpful. If you already have 1 or 2 locations, that's indeed helpful. But if you don't, or if you're trying a different concept, the landlord wants to understand what that looks like. So working with somebody who's really great at design, who's great with visuals and so forth, that's what's going to set you aside from everyone else. It also puts whatever's in your mind, your ideas onto paper, so that your broker or the landlord has an understanding of your business. I often say, again, you only have one time to make that first impression. I have had people who've decided that they could provide the business plan themselves and create, what it is, and they provide me a 50-pager that goes in depth about the business, your competitors, and all that stuff, which is in a traditional business plan, that's great, but no one has time to read all that. So I have an example here for you to see what it is landlords are looking for. Now somebody paid for this work, and it gave a background about their experience in the business, what type of business they're trying to open, their menu in this case. You also have accolades. They may not have owned, in this case, it was a cafe, an all-day cafe that goes into a wine shop. They may not have business experience in the food and beverage industry, but they have had experience in other businesses. They accomplished a lot in their businesses. They won awards. They were recognized for their service. They also were in the financial sector, right? So they had a business, whatever the business or business relations they had, whether it's managing a team or actual business ownership experience, that all goes in here. This shows the landlord that you have a lot of abilities, skills that would ensure you to be successful. So providing all that, along with even maybe, you sketched out your ideal floor plan or how the space is going to look. It could be, you putting together all of the your Pinterest saved items that shows the landlord the type of look you're going for this. So however that is, you're trying to convey a lot of information to a landlord, and that landlord may not be one person, right? So this has to be something similar to this branding deck that can be forwarded on via email, and then multiple people can look at it and make a determination if you're the right business to go into that location.
Susanna, can I ask, so if someone wanted to have a deck like this made for themselves, they might reach out to graphic designers and say, I want to have a branding deck made for a proposal for a property owner. Is that something that's kind of how you would frame it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely graphic designer. I actually have a couple of people that I refer out to. Sometimes, architecture firms have design teams as well, and they could put something like this together. And generally speaking, I've seen people charge $2,000, sometimes more. Sometimes more, because they also include naming, trying to figure out a good name, some catchy name for your business, or the like. So there are people out there. There are not a lot of them, but there are a few people that do a really great job. And this is a tool that you can use ongoing. This is not meant to, $2,000 is a lot of money for a small business, for a startup. It may seem a lot of money, like a lot of money, but it pays off in so many ways, because this one you can use again and again. This is something that, when you come around to a second location, or you need a warehouse, and you're not quite fully functioning as a business, this gives the landlord a really good idea as to your direction and your future.
And then we had someone ask to have this as a bigger image. So again, I just want to emphasize why you have it at the small scale it is and why we can't show it at a bigger scale.
Yes, someone else paid $2,000 for this too, so it would be unfair for me to just provide someone else's work. But if you're working with your broker, I'm sure they can show you, what it is that they're looking for. And again, as I outlined, it's providing your accolades, your experience. How are you going to operate this business? Your menu, your design plan, color schemes, all of that can be included. Don't take it past 20 pages. It just becomes too much information. They won't read it all. They, pretty much just want bullet point of a lot of those details that we were just talking about.
Great. And I think if you can offer us any referrals, that would be great. If I could include that in the Friday recap by email. I think people might like to have anybody you can refer.
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we found your perfect spot, and we're ready to make an offer. So we do so by putting together a letter of intent. And this is a template that our company uses. And the letter of intent is intended to give details on very specific deal points in the lease. So, here I have I think it's 4-page letter of intent. We discuss, we identify the location, the size, the rent schedule, what is it that we're proposing to start off the rent with. We asked the landlord, what is the triple net, right? Because the triple net changes year to year and property to property. Then in this, we negotiate the free rent period. The rent commencement and the lease commencement are two different things. Your lease oftentimes commences the moment both parties sign the lease agreement, but your rent commencement could be 3 months later. It could be a year later. These are the deal points that we're negotiating now, that by the time we get to a lease, the landlord has hired an attorney, drafted, from our 4 pages into something that's probably 40 pages. So every subject that is on this letter of intent gets expanded by quite a bit. So we also talk about the use. As I mentioned earlier, the use clause will help identify what you're able to do in your space, but it also hopefully will allow you to get your own non-compete clause, right? So having that use clause and non-compete all discussed at this point is very important. Triple net expenses. Triple net expenses vary from property to property. So you'll see in the expenses portion, it oftentimes identifies property tax and insurance, common area maintenance, and sometimes certain utilities get grouped into triple net as well. For instance, water, sewer, and garbage typically are included. Not always, but typically they are. And so, in this portion of it, when we first submit it to the landlord, we're making assumptions that certain things are included. When the landlord replies back, they'll formally identify, yes, you have to pay electricity separately and definitely Wi-Fi. If you're an office user, Wi-Fi might be included, but for the most part, Wi-Fi is not. And then the next, and with triple net, one thing that I like to try to negotiate on behalf of tenants is controlling the controllable CAMs, meaning like property management fees are often wrapped into the common area maintenance. And so property management fees, what we try to do is try to cap it at a 5% annual increase, because, you know, if the landlord is doing their own property management, that means they're giving themselves a raise if it's above that number. But all of these things can be negotiated. This is where the letter of intent stage is helpful. We also want to identify the landlord's work. And the landlord's work could also be how the space is currently. So for instance, we want to identify how many amps of power. If there's a need for a gas line, you want to see if there is one, or if you want to identify exactly, you know, how big that gas pipe is. Same with water and sewer, the drain lines and whatnot. If a space was already, you know, your use previously, for instance, you know, if it's an insurance office, then they already have a restroom in place. So we identify that an ADA restroom is already there, that it's in good working order. HVAC, you want to determine how much HVAC you need by identifying how many square feet per 1 ton for heating and air conditioning. If it's brand new construction, sometimes those spaces have the unit designated in a certain location. For instance, most buildings, the HVAC unit is on the roof deck. And so you might have it where there's a space for it, the landlord has identified that. And then who distributes the HVAC? Is it you? Is it the landlord? This is where we can discuss that and make a determination how it is delivered. Sometimes if the space is, you know, turnkey, for instance, this is for a dentist, and it was a dental practice previously, then, you know, we can ask the landlord to make sure that all the infrastructure is still in place, counters and cabinets are left, or if it's outdated, then you ask the landlord to remove all that stuff, have them maybe demo a wall. You know, each scenario is different, but this is where you can identify it with the landlord. In this, you can also identify what you're doing, right? So I especially do this in the situation where we are trying to outbid others. And so we indicate that, you know, well, tenant is willing to do a little bit more than what most, right? So for instance, if the space was not a restaurant previously and it requires a type 1 and you're willing to install that, this is where we do that. And so the letter of intent is a very important aspect of negotiations. Oh, we also identify how much your security deposit and first month's rent are as well. The landlord uses this to draft up the lease agreement. So indicating your address and address for notices will be important for the term of the lease. You also need to provide all the contact information that will go all into the lease when they need to provide you know, a notice to you. Do you want it to be sent to your business where your employees might be going through your mail, or do you have a PO box, or do you have an office? Andrea, did you have something else?
Yeah, I was just curious, for the letter of intent, does a commercial broker typically help someone walk through and say, you might want to ask about the HVAC, or you might want to ask about this? So you're offering guidance as well as taking their recommendations for what they want in the letter of intent?
Well, I always advise, you know, at this point, we've actually visited the space a few times, and after that first visit, you would have maybe an architect and a general contractor, or if you only need electrical work, then you would just bring your electrician. Whatever the case may be, those individuals are the ones that really be able to tell you, because we don't know how to look, go into the roof deck to look at the HVAC and know its condition. Those are things you should find experts for to help guide you. And again, I've had it where the HVAC is outdated. And so we'll even ask the landlord to warrant that for a year. If there are repairs that are required that exceed $5,000, then, we're asking the landlord to take care of that if it's an older unit. Many ways of negotiating these terms. And it varies from location to location.
Thank you.
And then your tenant improvement allowance as well. This is where we negotiate that. It's oftentimes quoted in per square foot rate. And again, it varies. Sometimes the free rent helps to offset some of the tenant improvements. There are sometimes landlords that are nonprofit organizations and they just don't have the funds, right? But there are creative ways of providing you breaks here through the rent or starting your lease later in exchange for the tenant improvement allowance.
Thank you. And I know we have Kate here. Maybe I can let you speak, Kate, and you said that typically your company would come in and support at this time a commercial broker. So let me just find you in our list of participants and maybe you could give us your insight. So Kate, I believe I've just offered you the ability to come on and talk if you're interested.
Hi, I don't know if it's working.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Yeah, we're a commercial GC. We work with tenants kind of all sizes, and typically, exactly like what Susanna is saying, is we, after someone's seen a site once or twice, especially if they're a restaurant or a salon or something that's going to have equipment that they're not really sure what their power requirements are going to be. They haven't really walked through that process yet. They'll usually bring a GC in and just say, hey, this is the space I'm thinking of. Like, can you tell me if this is going to work for me? Or if it's not going to work for me, what kind of dollars am I looking at to get it into working condition, so that the broker can go back and help negotiate that with the landlord? Or sometimes that just kind of kills the deal. So it's really important to get a GC or somebody who's an expert in that early in the process, because what you don't want to do is sign a lease and then realize, oh, hey, actually, I'm going to be spending $300,000 more than I thought I was going to. And we find that a lot of times, someone will bring in an architect, and between your architect and your broker, they'll have some really great ideas about design and how the space can be used and all of that, but they won't be able to look at an electrical panel and say this is in working order. So usually it needs to be a team of all three of us, and most GCs of reputable size will do that initial, like, spacewalk and everything, an initial ROM budget for you without cost. So it's something you should definitely reach out for and not be shy about, because until you actually enter into a contract with a GC, they're probably not going to charge you for that service, and it helps you kind of get set off on the right foot.
Thank you, Kate. It'd be great if you could put your contact details in the chat for everybody too.
Sure.
And I'm assuming GC stands for general contractor, just to be sure.
It does, yeah. Oh,
okay.
Yeah. And MEP is mechanical, electrical, plumbing. So
great.
my original conversation there.
Great, thank you. All right, so now we've completed letter of intent negotiations. We can, lobby back and forth a couple of times before we finalize the terms. Then we go on to lease negotiation. So at this point, the landlord puts together a lease and then provides a draft for you to review. During that time, I always remind clients that please read every word of the contract. It is so important. Once you sign the lease, there's nothing that can be negotiated afterwards, right? You've now have a binding contract. You've signed, it's notarized. it would be hard to take to court and say, oh, but I didn't know, right? So it is very, very important that you read the lease in its entirety. I also advise that as you're reading through the lease, take a highlighter or write down notes. If you don't understand something, make note of it. Make note of it. If you want to change something in the lease, it doesn't read right, or I mean, I've seen countless leases where you know, it was for a salon and it said no salons, right? So landlords are using templates, or attorneys are using templates. They're supposed to read it through and make changes accordingly, but they make mistakes too. So make sure that you read through every aspect of it, make those notes, and then have those things ready for your first discussion with your attorney. You know, typically the first 30 minutes is free. Get those things out of the way, have that discussion, and then be ready to send that over to them, and then they can redline the lease accordingly. They'll make changes that protect you through the legal language, but they also will take any of the items that are of importance to you that you've identified to address that in the lease as well. Oh, make sure it's also a real estate attorney. We, as brokers, we get asked a lot to read through the lease agreements. We'll be able to read through and identify, you know, the deal points in the letter of intent are indeed in the lease, but we cannot, as brokers, give you legal advice. We actually get in trouble. Our license is at stake. So unfortunately, we can't do any legal advice to you whatsoever. But it is really wise. This is money that's well spent. I mean, you're going to be basically married to the landlord for the next 5 or 10 years. So not reading through and not understanding your lease doesn't help, because the lease will come into play when you have a problem. And nobody knows your business better than you, thinking through of aspects down the road that might affect your business. So read that lease. I've seen people actually not understand a single thing and still sign the lease. I look at the leases all the time. I still don't understand what I'm reading half the time either. So making sure that you have an expert navigate you through that is of utmost importance. During your lease review, you can also take that time to go through the space with your subcontractors, electricians, plumbers. You might uncover something throughout that process. So those are the situations where, well, you indeed can renegotiate the lease terms, right? You may have found out that the plumbing line is too small, and code requirements change all the time, right? So in fact, it changed last year, I believe. Those things, when they change, you're the one stuck with the space and the lease. So if you don't identify it before the lease is signed, there's not much recourse, or you're stuck with a very, very big plumbing bill to get it up to code. Yes, inspect the space. I can't say that enough. It's utterly important to do so. And then contact in the lease agreement, it often has a clause in there regarding your insurance and what you cover. Oftentimes you have to name your landlord as well in the insurance. So provide that information to your insurance broker. Oftentimes we can actually lower the requirements as requested by the landlord. I've seen where they wanted $5 million and $2 million. That's rare, but it does happen on occasion. Oftentimes that's unnecessary. So have your insurance broker help you make a determination how much you should be covering your business. And keep in mind, the insurance, business insurance is different from the insurance that's in the triple net. So the triple net, going back to triple net, I mentioned is property tax, and insurance. And that insurance, the landlord splits up amongst all the tenants, depending on how big your space is, in relation to the entire building or entire shopping center. So the landlord will allocate that amount for you to pay for the property. It covers the property, but the insurance that you're buying for, as per the lease agreement, is for your business insurance. Yes, there's no one size fits all. I've never had identical scenarios, and I've worked at Domino's Pizza. Their spaces are pretty much identical to to everybody's else. But when you look at floor plans and construction and so forth, it's not one size fits all. Each landlord operates and manages their properties very differently. There may be parking lot, there might be parking garage, parking attendants, like all of these factors are part of the leasing process. And so we just have to take property by property and hopefully we've thought of everything and identified them throughout the course of the process. I think that's it.
Well, that's great. It gives us about 10 minutes for question and answer. I already have a few questions in chat for you. Alyssa asked, where can she find more information on the required number of parking spaces for a business type? So I think that was specific to Bellevue, but if you can give any overview of that, that would be great.
Yeah, you can. The best thing to do is call the city of Bellevue and they'll direct you to the right person. They do have it written in their codes, and it's a lot to navigate, so it's easier if you call somebody. And they're very helpful. They actually call or email. They'll email you back as well. It might take time. It doesn't happen within 24 hours. I find that it could be 3 or 4 days, sometimes a week.
Thank you. Shala asked earlier when you were talking about personal guarantee, she says, in lieu of personal guarantee, can it be for 6 months notice rather than the entire remainder of a lease?
Good question. I don't know the answer. Only the landlord knows. So yes, but yes, you can propose that. Will they agree to it or not? I don't know.
Right. And then I have John B. John, if you're comfortable asking your question, because it's a little lengthy and I think it'd be better if you can explain it. So I'm just going to allow you to come on and ask the question, if that's okay.
Hi there, I'm in a bit of a loud space, so hopefully you can hear me. My question relates to the timing on the term of a lease. So my first thing is just picking your brain a little bit to understand better. When you are seeing spaces that are, say, in the 2,000 square foot size range, what portion of those are for 3-year terms, 5-year terms, and 10-year terms? Just getting an understanding of a sense of like how that plays out. And then the second thing is, like, obviously the shorter the term, the more of a premium you're going to pay, presumably for things like tenant improvements and the whole leasing process that the landlords have to go through. We're getting a sense for how big of a premium you'd be paying when you try to push for a 3-year lease instead of a 5-year lease, or a 5-year instead of a 10-year.
If I understand your question correctly, the lease term, most of the time I'm advising clients, the longer you can go, you feel comfortable and you can sign the lease, the better. Typically, we're seeing 5 and 10-year leases, and then you have options to renew. And the options to renew tend to be equivalent in length of time or shorter. So for instance, if you're doing a 5-year lease, you'll do 2 5-year options to renew. And the renewal options are your options, so long as you are not in default. So it's not the landlord's option, but it's a contract that the landlord agrees that they will continue to lease the space to you for additional period, but you decide whether or not you want to continue those options. With negotiations of the initial term, that is what determines how much of free rent you're receiving, how much tenant improvements you're receiving. The longer the lease, the more that the landlord can justify giving you. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it largely does. And just to make sure I understand the first part correctly, you're saying most leases be for a 5-year and 10-year initial term. Is that, and are you seeing that evenly split?
It's what determines that is the amount of money the tenant has to invest to open the business. Do I see 2 and 3 year leases? Yes, I do. But most business, you don't want to move after 2 years. It's costly.
Yeah, I actually have another question I was going to pop in that's related to that I hope you can sort of answer as a follow on. So we're in one space and we've grown too much that we need to expand in the next space. So my concern is that the last thing I want to do is sign a new 5 or 10-year lease only to find out that 2 years from now we would again double the space that we have. So my question comes to, if we've already made a personal guarantee for a 5-year or that 10-year term, and 2 years in, we find out, hey, we really need new space. What the typical situation looks like for winding down a lease that you've already signed and you've already guaranteed.
So if you have 2 years remaining, you might be able to sublease the space. And you'd have to look at your lease to see if subletting is allowed. For the most part, subletting is allowed, but the landlord has to approve that party.
And are you responsible as the tenant to find that person that might sublet that space, and then you have to discuss that with the property owner?
Yes, I mean, communication is always going to be so important here, right? If you got a great landlord and maybe they have space within their building there or other space, they might, you just never know. They might say, okay, that's okay, we can find another tenant. That's easy. But according to a lease agreement, you are responsible. So you would have to pay the sublet, the fee for, if you need to find a broker to help you find somebody to take over your space, then you'd have to be the one to pay the broker fee. But if the landlord has a broker that they work with, they may take it on. I don't know. It's ideal to have the conversation with the landlord. Oftentimes landlords are, they own more than one property too. So they might have options for you. If you've been a great tenant and you want to maintain that relationship, I would talk to your landlord.
Thank you. Sarah has a question. Do you have recommendations for searching for commercial kitchen rentals?
So if you're in the state of Washington, I would suggest going on commercialmls.com. This is what I'd say 99% of commercial brokers that focus on retail. This is what we use on a day-to-day basis to find space for our clients. Even though you're not a member of Commercial MLS, you should be able to look through those as well. LoopNet is very popular, but it may not be as current.
Thank you. So we only have a couple minutes left, and if anybody has any last minute questions they want to pop into chat or the Q&A, they're welcome to. Otherwise, just a reminder, we'll send the deck as well as the recommendations that have been made here today, along with the recording by Friday, so everybody could go through it again at their leisure. Well, it doesn't look like anyone put any other questions in, although I think Stephanie, she did have her hand raised at one point. So Stephanie, let me see if I can find you here and I'll let you ask your question directly if you'd like. Stephanie, you're able to ask a question if you'd like to.
Oh, I think I put it in the question when you were talking about brand kits and pitch decks. I was offering that as something that I also do because I've had to do it for my business and several others.
Okay, so great. We'll definitely send along your details too, so people could reach out if they need that support.
Yep.
All right. Thank you everyone for being here. And thanks so much, Susanna. It was really helpful and informative, and so appreciate you.
Thank you. Good luck, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.